Hi there, it's Christy with the Chirp YouTube channel. This is the first video in a series of videos where I'm going to be talking about how to improve particular skills through play. This was a requested video from some clients that I had who said that that was the most eye-opening thing about having me in their homes, was how play could be tailored for each particular child. So, once again, I have my big notes here because it's very important to me that I do this in an organized sort of fashion so you can actually follow what I'm talking about instead of just coming on camera and rambling, because otherwise that's probably what I would do. There's just so much information in my head sometimes that I've learned that it's hard to organize it if I don't have some notes. So, this is going to be kind of a long series because I have a whole list of what I worked on with my clients, and so I'm going to just kind of go down the list, which is in order of approximate skill development, and I'm just going to talk about each item on the list and how I worked on that through play with my various different clients that I've had over the years. So self-regulation is the one we're going to talk about in this video, which I'm sure you saw in the title. And self-regulation is the ability to either stay calm through circumstances that are somewhat challenging, or to return to calm after you've been a little bit out of calm, which, being a little bit not in balance, is called dysregulation. And so the ability to come back to regulated after having been dysregulated is what we're talking about here. And being able to do it without a huge amount of outside influence, that means it's called self-regulation. There you go. Very nice definition, Christy. Okay, so think of a body when you go outside. Here in the desert, it's very hot and in fact humid today because we've had some monsoon activity. And so when I went out to do some grocery shopping today, I got home, I was overheated, I was feeling very sweaty, and if my body had not known how to return to its optimal level of functioning after getting overheated, then I would die, or at least I'd be very uncomfortable all the time. But my body likes to return to what's called homeostasis, or this is called homeostasis. My body likes to return to its optimal set point of temperature regulation. And so after I got in my air-conditioned environment, my body returned to a comfortable temperature rather than staying overheated. That's kind of the same thing we're talking about with these children, that it's just not in a temperature sense, it's in an emotional sort of being able to handle things sense. Examples of difficulty in this area, these are going to come from students that I have worked with. The very first one that comes to mind, I'm giving them all pseudonyms. These are not their real names, and I'm not going to give you any identifying information, obviously, because this is on YouTube for the world to see. But the first one I'm going to talk about, I am going to call him Benny. And when I first met this child, he was having tantrums that were hours long. And these were aggressive tantrums. He was only, I'm not sure if he was 3 yet. He was either 2 or 3. He's now 9, by the way, and in a mainstream classroom and doing fantastic. But at the time, he was either 2 or 3, and he was having tantrums that were hours long. Nobody could tell exactly what was setting off the tantrums. It seemed like absolutely everything set the tantrums off. So when I first met him, that is the state that this poor family was in, screaming in their house all the time. They were worried that the neighbors were going to call Child Protective Services on them all the time because they couldn't get the tantrums to stop. That's pretty extreme. And when I first started working with him, the only thing that he wanted to do, the only activity that he liked, was eating and playing with Thomas the Train toys. So he had a train table in the family room with tracks where he could build tracks on it. It was a really lovely setup. And he had his train cars in buckets, and he would carry them around with him, and no one was allowed to touch them. And even when he went over to his train table to play, no one was allowed to sit anywhere near him. And sometimes you couldn't even look at him while he was playing with his trains, or one of these tantrums would start. So that's one example of, that's the most extreme example that I've seen of difficulty staying regulated. I had another student, Anthony, who every time I saw him, he wanted to play exactly the same thing. He wanted me to be, I think I was always the bad guy, and he was always Batman. And he had the script all worked out in his head, and I was not allowed to deviate from that particular script, or there would be hitting and biting and kicking, and he would go and lock himself in the bathroom, and he just could not remain calm. So that's another example. And then there was Annie. She usually didn't have aggressive tantrums, but she had a lot of difficulty regulating herself during play because she was really hyper rigid when it came to how play was allowed to happen. And that's kind of what we're talking about with this whole video. Ultra rigid children who cannot be flexible. And obviously that is not helpful in the real world. So at first, when I introduced her to a new toy with aliens and a little elevator that went up and down with a crank, and she'd put the aliens in the elevator, say up, and they'd go up, and then they'd come back down, and then they'd go back up, and then they'd go back down. And that was all that could happen. And if I said, okay, time for aliens to go to sleep, or time for aliens to go to the moon in the rocket, she would get very upset. And a lot of times she'd just be done playing with me because I had ruined it all because I wanted to do something else other than going up and down in the elevator. So that's another example. If your child requires that toys always stay in the same order, if your child has to have the same exact thing happen every single time that you play a certain game or you play with a certain toy, or if your child cares more about how play looks than having people or objects actually do things. I had one little girl, I'll call her Jay. She'd put all the people in the dollhouse, she'd put them in chairs, and she would have spent the entire hour that I was at her home making sure that their knees and their elbows were all at exactly the same angle if I had allowed that to happen. And that's the kind of hyper rigidity we're talking about. She was very upset if anybody arose from their chairs, if anyone went to sleep or sat at a different table, or the people sat in the wrong chairs. This is not helpful behavior, and it's not going to lead to success in life. So even though it's very easy to get sucked into the trap of this following thing, the worst thing that you can do is to arrange your child's environment in advance to prevent or to end meltdowns. I can understand that it's very tempting because meltdowns are not fun, and all the screaming, and if your child happens to be aggressive, it's just not fun. However, it's not helpful because your child will get used to not having any obstacles in life. And when obstacles come, the tantrums will be even bigger, and your child won't have any skills to cope with them, with the feelings. So things that you might do in order to arrange your child's environment: maybe you know your child hates green, and so before you play Legos, every single time you sort out all the green ones, or you've taken them out and thrown them all away, or you only let the sibling play with the green ones already. Maybe you put your child's meal in 3 separate bowls because you know that your child will have a big meltdown if the food is touching. Or maybe you prevent your child's siblings from getting too close to him while he is playing trains because you know that if someone gets too close, or heaven forbid, touches one of those trains, there will be an hours-long tantrum. So those are some ideas that, think through your life as a parent or as a family member and think, am I doing any of those things that are arranging my child's environment maybe a little bit too much so that he's not getting any practice in calming himself? However, your child is not going to be able to independently calm himself. In this video, I'm going to use him. I try to switch back and forth because I don't want to say him or her, and so there you have it. So obviously, your child is not going to learn these skills by himself. He's going to need some coaching, and he's going to need to learn these skills in the least threatening way possible. It's all going to be threatening to him because he's over aroused. However, there are things that we can do to make it less threatening than it could be. One of the first things you're going to want to do is identify what your child's triggers are. If there are tons of triggers, if everything that doesn't go his way causes a meltdown, obviously there are a lot of triggers. Make yourself a list and don't freak out about it because it can be dealt with. It can get better. Usually the triggers have something to do with the child not getting things his way. And one of the reasons behind this is that not being able to have things exactly how he wants them leads to him feeling out of control. And if he already has a system, a physical and biological system that is over-arousable, he's already over-aroused by all of the stimuli around him. Maybe he's oversensitive to smell and sound and sight and touch. Maybe the tags in his outfits bother him. Maybe his sock seams bother him. That was one of mine as a child. Maybe the taste of his toothpaste lingers with him until lunchtime and just throws him off. So if he's already over alert by all those things, it's going to be very difficult for him to remain calm when anything happens that he can't control. And so these kids often seem very controlling. They often ask repetitively, if they're verbal, they ask repetitively what's happening next, what are we doing tomorrow, what about the next day, what are we going to do at school, or what are we going to do at the park, because they are trying to organize their world in their head so that they can prepare for it and be in control as much as possible. And it makes me so sad that they have to work this hard, but they really are trying. And so let's help them as much as we can. And the way we're going to do that is by being a little bit of a booger. So once you identify what your child's triggers are, yes, I wanted to add. Sometimes it seems a little bit cute when very small children are very rigid. We think, oh, he's such a cute little engineer, or that's so cute, he just likes it how he likes it. And I have to say that while I understand that, because there are times when it is really endearing, these behaviors are not helpful. And when your child goes to a public place and can't interact with the other kids because they don't play according to his rules, or when your child goes to school or preschool and cannot function in the classroom because nothing is organized his way, there's going to be a big problem. His life is going to be really unpleasant for a while, and so is yours. And also, if any little change leads to a meltdown, your child's not going to have any friends because other kids don't know the rules, and they don't necessarily want to follow your child's rules. And if there's any delay in your child's language or cognitive development, those delays are just going to get worse because your child is not able to interact with people and therefore isn't able to gain skills from those interactions. So just something to think about. Also, if these difficulties in self-regulation aren't treated, your child is very likely to eventually be aggressive and violent, if he isn't already, because when you're in a red alert situation inside yourself, violence seems like a reasonable option. We don't think it is, of course, because we're the grown-ups and we're regulated, but when a person is dysregulated, violence seems like a great choice because it's going to get us what we want really fast. During this step, you also want to check out what helps your child stay calm. And I'm going to put a link right here to a video that I did on emotional regulation and sensory integration options. And if you watch that, you'll get some ideas of how to tell things that help your child, things that make your child feel out of control, and things that are difficult for him. And so if you know, for example, that your child really likes to swing, when your child's getting to the steaming point, you can back off and say, let's swing for a few minutes. And therefore, your child kind of goes up and down like this in anxiety level rather than like this, which is less comfortable for everyone. Okay, so now comes the tricky part. After you figure out what your child's triggers are, after you figure out what helps your child stay calm, you're going to want to start to probe to figure out how far you can go before a meltdown occurs. And that can be a little tricky. You're probably going to have a few meltdowns in the process, but that's okay because you are learning. Consider yourself to be an experimenter. You are a child scientist, and you are experimenting with your child to see what is going to help him learn skills of self-regulation, which he very much needs. Keep reminding yourself, I'm not being mean. I'm helping my child, even if it seems a little bit mean right now. Down the line, when he is a functional person, when he's able to go to school, when he has friends, when he can play with other kids, I am going to feel so glad that I did this, even though it's a little challenging right now. Then you're going to push the child's boundaries a little bit. And this is where I say my job is just to be a little bit more stubborn than the child is. And that's your job as a family member of these kids too. And sometimes it kind of stinks. But if you see it with the right attitude, it can be kind of a fun little game. So for example, you're going to want to use a calm, soothing voice at all times when you're working on this. You're going to say things like, it's okay, I can stay calm. You're going to say things like, Daddy doesn't want my trains, he just wants to play with me. You can say things like, playing together is fun. And once again, you want to use calm voices. What is happening? Sorry, I have hair on my face today. I mean like hair that's not mine. You want to make sure that you use a soothing tone of voice, that you're engaged, but you're not too much in the kid's face. I'm going to use the example here of Benny, the really extremely over-arousable child with the Thomas the Train sets. So after I observed him for a couple of weeks, and I was only seeing him once a week, so this is, I mean, the fact that it took so long to get him to the point where he was more regulated is only because I was only there once a week. And his family was kind of terrified of him for quite some time, and so they didn't really buy in to the fact that what I was doing was going to help until much later. And so it did take quite some time because it was kind of just me forging ahead into the wilderness and his family looking at me like, what are you doing? You're crazy. But you know, it worked in the end. So first of all, I figured out that if I got too close to the train table, if I touched any of the trains that he wasn't playing with, or of course if I touched the trains he was playing with, or if I suggested that anything might occur in a different pattern from what he was used to, he would have a tantrum. And at the beginning, once I did poke out a problem, his tantrums would last the whole time that I was there, and I would be helping talk him down from it during that whole time. Eventually it got to the point where me just talking to him while he was playing trains was okay, and that was kind of fun. And so then I took it a little bit further, and instead of just talking to him about what the trains were doing, for example, I might say, wow, Percy's looking very green today. In the second step, I might say, what if Percy crashes into Thomas? That would be cool. And of course, that's not part of his script. So he would go, no, crashing. And he would start having a fit. And I'd help him calm down by saying, oh, it's okay. It was just an idea. We don't have to do that. It's okay. And so after a couple of, I don't know how long that took, at least a couple of months, maybe as long as 6 months, then he was able, with that sort of verbal assurance and without me pushing it any farther, he was able to stay mostly calm. He'd start yelling, but then once I said, oh, it's okay, it was just an idea, you don't have to do it, then he was able to stay calm. So after I was able to talk to him, after I was able to make suggestions about how the play might evolve, because he usually would take a scene from a Thomas movie and he would reenact it with his trains on the train table. But he'd do it maybe like 100 times in a row, and it was always exactly the same. And that was really fun for him. Of course, no other child's going to want to play it that way unless they also have the same sort of difficulty. But they probably have their own scenes that they want to reenact. And so one of my jobs with working with kids is to help them to be more flexible. And when I was making recommendations, even though I did not make him follow through on them, what I was doing was implanting the idea in his head and allowing his brain to get used to the idea that there were other ways to play. And so I did this for many weeks. And eventually, I was able to get close enough where I could lay my arm on the train table and talk to him a little bit closer about what was happening with the trains, and I could make suggestions. And this whole time, I'm assessing, is he, I think of it in my head as green, yellow, red. Red is the tantrum. Yellow is he's kind of steamy and he's not feeling very happy with me. And green is I'm totally leaving him alone. When I'm there, when I'm working on this, when you're working on this with your student, you don't want to be green, because that means he's not getting any boundaries pushed at all. He's perfectly happy, and he could do that for the rest of his life and never have any friends. You want to be in the yellow zone where he's a little uncomfortable, and so are you, but he's not so uncomfortable that he's having a tantrum. And that's called the zone of proximal development, or the ZPD. And that means that there's learning going on, and there are boundaries being bent and changed. Even though he is not real happy with you, and you don't feel real great about it because it's uncomfortable for us to not meet our child's needs or what we think their needs are. But that's where the good stuff is taking place. That's the meaty part. So after I was able to rest my arm on the train table, I kept using a very calm voice. Wow, Thomas just fell off the cliff. Oh no. Then I began playing with trains that he wasn't playing with. And maybe I'd drive them on my lap, or I'd drive them along the edge of the train table. Or maybe I was just holding some of them, depending on the day and his ability to handle it, of course. It's always kind of a back and forth. It's not a science, it's an art. I still was being very engaging and very interested in what he was doing. I just happened to be also playing with some trains, which is uncomfortable for him. But it also is teaching him that, hey, if Christy plays with those trains, that's okay. She's not going to take them home with her. She's not going to ruin all my fun. It's non-threatening if we do it slowly. Then I begin getting in the way of his routines a little bit more. For example, one routine that he really loved was to dangle Percy off of a cliff, and then Thomas would come in and pull him to safety, and everyone would celebrate, and Sir Topham Hatt would have some confetti, and it was grand. However, so after he did that 2 times or something like that, I would drive my car in like under where Percy was dangling and say, "It's okay, Percy, I'll catch you." And of course, at first, this caused a major upheaval. But after a couple of times when I did something different like that, he started thinking, that's kind of cool. Maybe there are other ways that I could play this. Once again, depending on the day, some days he was very flexible because he was calmer, and some days he was very rigid because he was not so calm. But that's the thing, when it's an art, we can watch that in our child and let it happen naturally. Once again, we don't want it to be red, we don't want it to be green, we want to be in that yellow zone. So whenever a tantrum did start, I would back off and I would say, it's okay, you don't have to do that, I'll sit over here for a while. So basically I was telling him that I hear that you just got overwhelmed by frustration. I hear you and I respect it, and I'm backing off. So while we're always pushing just a little bit, we also do need to respect that there's a certain point past which we cannot push that child, and past which it won't be helpful to push the child. So that's important to remember. Getting this particular child, Benny, to the point where he wanted me to play trains with him took more than a year. And I still see his family regularly because I'm totally in love with him and his twin sister and his parents, and I just don't know what my life would be like without them. But it took so long because I was only there once a week, like I said, because his situation was very extreme, like I said, and because at the beginning his family wasn't really convinced that I was making any progress. And so in your situation, since you're there all the time, you can have a playtime every single day and make much faster progress than that. And just percentages wise, it's unlikely that your child is going to be that severe, I hope. But if so, now you know there's extreme hope out there because I've seen it happen. It's amazing. Also, at the end here, when a meltdown does happen, reward your child's recovery. Use the same phrase each time. When you're done, we can, and choose something beforehand that you know your child really likes. Maybe your child, for example, with Benny, sometimes we said, when you're done crying, we'll put on Thomas for a few minutes, and then we would put on a Thomas video. During a tantrum, you can also say, when you're done, we'll have some apple, if apple is something that your child really likes. Whatever it is, put something in that blank that your child is really fond of. And while it seems like this is rewarding negative behavior, what it's actually doing is rewarding finishing the tantrum, getting done with the meltdown. And when you provide the child with something at the end of a tantrum that is really positive, what happens in the child's brain is that he starts to realize the shorter this tantrum is, the quicker I get something pleasant. And it really does help the self-regulation to happen sooner. I know it seems kind of like an against the grain sort of feeling on the inside because it feels as if we're pampering the child or something like that, but that's not how it works. And I recommend thinking in advance of what is it? What is that? I mean, you don't want to feed the child a cookie every time they have a tantrum, especially if they're having tantrums all day long, because they'll weigh 1,200 pounds. But you do want to have some sort of event at the end that you can offer that is positive enough that it will encourage the child to end the tantrum sooner. Also, I recommend that you keep track of how far your child has come. It's easy to get disheartened when the progress is taking longer than we think it should. So you might have an app in your phone where, like the Notepad app, where you can just type in, today Allison agreed to let the fireman slide down the pole instead of climbing up the pole. That's a great win. So it's a good idea to keep track of the boundaries you were able to push and how far you were able to go before you got pushed back. That way you will feel encouraged, and you will see that even though things may be still a little bit messy and your child is still a little dysregulated a lot of the time, it's less messy than it used to be, and that makes everybody feel hopeful. I hope this video was very helpful to you. If you know a family that has a child who's struggling in this area, pass on the link to this video. You can subscribe by clicking right up here on our logo, and you can leave a comment or a question below. I hope you have a great day. I'll see you in my next video. Bye.